from the book of Esther, chapter 4, verses 12 through 14. The New Revised Standard Version reads, When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all of the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." One thing to know about Esther is that when she had the choice, she went all in. Her choice to go all in didn't come with some fancy announcement. She probably wasn't sitting at home writing a list of all the ways that she would go all in 2019. She didn't need to ask anyone to be her all-in accountability partner. While all those things are wonderful for us to consider, sometimes going all in means to simply be faithful. It is through Esther's faithfulness that we see someone going all in, a model for how we should respond in the upcoming year. At the time in which Esther is introduced in the story, she is a parentless young Jewish girl in the custody of her cousin Mordecai. Together they lived in post-exilic times in the Persian city of Susa, where only a small population of Jews lived, presumably as minorities that were marginalized and powerless. Esther's life changed, however, when it was time for a new queen to take the throne. Queen Vashti had been disposed of, and the king was looking for his next counterpart. An edict goes out for all the young women in the land to vie for the role of queen, and Esther has no business in this lineup. She's Jewish and not Persian. She's out of place, and she has no connection to nobility. Her past up until this point of the text did not reveal a bright future, and yet there was purpose to her unique positioning. This lowly orphan Jewish girl enters into the king's palace with the rest of the women, and she ends up finding favor in the king's eyes. And in the span of a biblical chapter, Esther goes from being at the lowest of the lows to the highest of the highs, coming out on top as queen. Esther's elevation is a reminder to us that we can believe God for greater in our low moments and valley seasons. Maybe you've made it through 2018 wondering about your own placement and positioning. Maybe you've been asking God about the events and situations of the past year. And maybe you too have experienced some disappointments. But have no fear and be faithful to whatever God has called you to and through this current season. Because in this next season, you have no idea what your next position may be. But this isn't the end of Esther's story. As queen, she'll have to continue to be just as faithful and do so with her decision making. While Esther was making her way to the throne on the inside of the palace, her cousin Mordecai was still on the outside. He reveals his Jewish identity to the king's servants, who in turn tell Haman, the king's right-hand man, who is quite literally drunk with power. Haman sees his power being questioned by Mordecai and escalates the situation quickly with the king, suggesting that the entire Jewish population be destroyed. The edict is set, and the text reads in chapter 4, verse 3, that there was a great mourning amongst the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting. An entire population of people has been ordered for execution, and there's potentially only one person that can save them: Esther. If you've ever felt the weight of the world or of a great number of people or your family, you may have felt like Esther. She's the only person who has the potential power to intervene, and she even questions her own ability to save herself. But Providence, remember that Esther was placed on purpose. Every scene in the story reveals God's hand at work, protecting what the enemy has attempted to destroy. Esther knows that she is playing a dangerous game here. In the Persian court system, one could not appear to the king without being summoned, and to do so would guarantee instant death. And Esther had not been summoned for 30 days at this time. But Mordecai reminds her, perhaps Esther had come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Perhaps she, at the right moment, would realize that she could and would, in fact, make an everlasting impact, not just for herself, but for an entire kingdom. Perhaps you too have come to a particular juncture in your life for such a time as this. Perhaps you have been placed in a peculiar situation, such as Esther, meant to change the trajectory of your entire family for generations to come. Perhaps you will need to make a decision in 2019 that proves that you are, in fact, going all in for God. And just like you will have to make a decision, Esther makes this decision to go all in for her people. She has to overcome the temptation of self-centeredness to discern God's call and direction in saving the Jewish population in Susa. And for her obedience to the call, God makes a way. Esther is faithful to the task that she is called to, and it requires her to make the decision to deny herself on behalf of others. If we are really to go all in for Christ, and if we are ready to go all in for Christ, we must be faithful and make whatever decisions we need to make in the coming year, because we never know who or what is waiting for us to do so. Esther didn't waste her power by satisfying her own selfish, fleshly desires as we sometimes do with new positioning. She instead agrees to approach the king, and as soon as he sees her, the text says she wins his favor instead of her anticipated death. But she doesn't immediately ask for a reversal of the edict. She instead asks the king to dine with her and invites Haman as well, and she sits right across from her enemy. During their banquet together, Esther finally reveals her Jewish identity to the king and lets him know that Haman has been conspiring to kill her people. And in the ultimate plot twist, a plan that was set to destroy all the Jews in the land is turned to destroy Haman instead. Esther remains as queen. Mordecai is elevated in the courts, and the Jewish population is now given the respect they deserve in the kingdom and can live peacefully amongst the Persians. Now, what's most striking about the story of Esther is not her sudden rise to the throne or her saving of an entire nation, but the fact that God is actually not mentioned in the text at all. Yet, we see traces of God throughout the entire story, proving to us that God can and God still speaks in the silent seasons. Silent seasons are the hardest for us as believers because we're not quite sure what to do and where to go, and our instincts to take control and do things our own way starts to kick in. But in our silent seasons, we have to be assured that God is still at work and in the midst of things. Esther was careful in her approach to the king, and she allowed the time and space for God's plan to unfold, and it worked out the way it needed to. Let us be just as faithful to God's plan as Esther was, and God will see us through too. The story of Esther proves to us that entire trajectories can change, and miracles can happen if we choose to just be faithful. Esther understood that she was placed on purpose, and each decision she made thereafter demonstrated her trust and her obedience to God. I pray that we all have similar traits as we enter into 2019, and as we choose to just be faithful, we will, in fact, go all in for God. God bless you, Providence.